Buddy, so I think the main topic I thought was on the agenda was continuation of the discussion around enabling CI for EDK2 platforms and what all that means, including things like repo layouts, tool chains, build processes, all those kind of things that we need. There's some of us that believe we need some alignment on to practically enable CI. I'm a little worried there isn't a new audience here compared to last week, which I think means we probably won't have a whole bunch of new ideas, but I'll open to the floor to see if anyone has ideas.
So I guess as far as the kind of the two-phase approach we've had, which is there's the generic feature packages like ext4 and then the min platform, advanced features packages. It looks like we're making good progress on those, correct?
Isaac, have you done anything additional?
I'm still ramping on all this stuff, so I think I did respond based on the discussion, and I didn't get notified, so I see your response now. But yeah, so I mean, I think that's the thing that would be useful is just to nail down what like entry acceptance criteria we want for adding a platform to the CI.
Well, let's start with the feature packages, Isaac. Let's like the platforms is a second step. The feature packages look like probably the easiest to get CI coverage on first because they don't have a full platform build associated with them. They're similar to the packages that are in the EDK2 repo from a CI perspective.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't speaking exactly. Yeah, any package is fine for the point of view of what I want. I just want to know what are the build targets that need to be supported, what are the tool chains that need to be supported, and what are the minimum of the existing tests that we should support. So if we can just write that down for people, then it's an easy checklist to say, okay, I've made this package ready to go. Can we add it so that it stays ready to go? That's the use case I was thinking of, Mike.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Sean, writing it down would be good, but I think the what's done in the EDK2 repo now is Visual Studio 2019 and GCC. Is it 11 or 9? I forget which one we're at right now.
It's really the GCC 5 toolchain tag, which, depending on what version of Linux you're running on, is a different version. But for our containers and the VM, I believe that has been always GCC 11. There is some work underway to move to GCC 12.
Right. And then as far as the CPU build types that are supported, that's up to each individual package to define what CPU types it wants to support. So for example, if it's a feature that's only applicable to maybe Intel platforms, then maybe it only wants to support IE32 and x64. If it's a more general purpose package like ext4, it probably should be building for all the supported architectures.
Yep.
And then for the individual CI checks that are enabled, I think the bare minimum is just the build check, right? And then all the other ones are around code quality, and as many of those as you can turn on. And I think Michael Kubaki's been providing some good discussions on the EDK2 repo about trying to turn on more of the checkers in a consistent way across all the packages, including things up through spell checking and the EDK2 code style, and more recently some of the code QL checkers for static analysis. But Isaac, I think as far as phasing things in, you could start, I think, even with just a build only, just to get it turned on, and then incrementally, as time permits, add more.
Yeah, in that discussion thread, I put a link to kind of all the plugins, which you can then see each of them, and they're all controllable from your own packages YAML file.
Yeah, I noticed that, and that I got that far. I, disabled one that was failing and had a couple that were passing and was working the way through the list. But it seemed like the failing ones were known failures, not expected to work. So, but that's okay. We can just capture that somehow so that everybody doesn't have to learn it individually.
Okay, and there are some, if your packages have known, failures or known things that aren't compliant, there are ways to exclude, certain things, whether it be certain GUIDs, certain files, those types of things, to still be able to turn on the checker and get coverage for all the rest of it.
Okay.
But I would absolutely encourage you to discuss this, even on the mailing list, Isaac. I think anybody who's trying to do this, they'll have questions, and having those discussions on the mailing list will help educate other package owners that need to do similar work. And it'll be a lot of the repeat, I think, of the pointers to the plugins that describe their YAML format for things like exceptions or how to turn the checker on and off and things like that.
All right, well, let me know if you have any problems. And then, yeah, if you have changes or you're ready to enable some more packages, we can either push those into that branch I have, or, we can start on your branch, doesn't matter to me. But I guess, Mike, again, one of the main things here is we need to get this broadened out to more of the maintainers. I think if I recall last week, Rebecca was going to try to reach out to some of the ARM side, and we'll see if there's any progress there.
Right. So I think what's interesting to me is if we start with the feature packages, and I don't know how many people are involved beyond Isaac and Pedro. Do you?
I don't. I haven't really enumerated them all and put them up. We could do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
effectively, Mike, I think for the purpose of this discussion, it's just me though. I think I made all the feature packages standalone buildable. I don't think most of them were. I think they were just folders.
Yep, that's great. I really appreciate all that effort. But I just want to make sure that if there's additional maintainers we need involved in the feature packages, let's make sure that we know that list. And if it's just you and Pedro, that's great, Isaac. We'll get that going. There's a couple of ones that are pretty simple, like some of the driver packages. Like there's some IHV driver things that would probably be pretty simple to add as just standalone builds, right? Those aren't full platform builds. So those might be interesting to get into some basic checks there. The next step is probably picking a platform. And I don't know, Isaac, what is the most modern Intel platform that's in the EDK2 platforms repo?
I mean, the most active one is the Whitley one.
Okay.
Because we're doing things with that. AMI is doing things with that. Open Compute Project, OSF, Open System Firmware, might be doing some things with it. So there's a couple, yeah. So there's some eyes there, and it's a good test case for us too because it does have some unique build requirements, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So we can
Okay.
just learn how to capture how to handle those kinds of activities.
Some like pre-build and post-build steps, right? Because that's where the platform stuff gets a little messy.
Yeah, there's some of that, but basically I cleaned it up from what you're used to internally, where it is a build target with the DSC and FDF to do the ACPI pre-build stuff. And there was really only one problem, so maybe we could talk through that. Like I had to generate one of the files inside the source tree instead of in the build output directory, which is, kind of a no-no, but I couldn't find a way around it. So maybe we should look at that. But yeah, that's it. Basically, it's 2 build commands, one to do the pre-build stuff and one to build the final image.
Okay. So I mean, if we want to look at that second phase, maybe taking something like the Whitley platform to see what it would take to add it as a basic build CI check for code changes, and see what challenges there are in a separate branch or like a code review branch against EDK2 platforms for us to look at and maybe discuss in detail in this future meetings here about what it takes to turn on the basic build of a platform in EDK2 platforms. And then we can refine it from there to see what makes sense, what doesn't. If there's some common challenges we think would be, for all platforms, how do we want to address those and get it cleaned up on that first example of maybe an actively maintained platform like Whitley.
I did try, I'm trying to see what it was. I did try one of the Intel platforms. I did realize that our DSC parser does not parse PCD values that get assigned and then later used as conditionals in the DSC processing.
Yes, the multi-pass parser for DSCs. That is a challenge.
So that's something to think about. I think, Mike, we talked about this years ago when that feature was added. For all the platforms we use, we don't actually use that feature. And we've talked about changing the DSC format so that it was much easier to parse, or bringing along one standard parser to solve all of this rather than having multiple parsers. But so I was going to go off and prototype how much work it might be to add those DSC assignments into kind of the global dictionary to get resolved during parsing. But that's a pretty big sticking point at the moment.
Okay.
Because the Intel platforms make heavy use of that.
Yeah, and what I don't know, Sean, is I think from a just a pure parsing, Lexiac complexity multi-pass perspective, it would be better if our metadata files were single pass on their parsing to get through them. Given that the current syntax requires multiple passes to resolve everything, what's not clear to me is the existing usages that require multiple passes. Would it be possible to convert them to a syntax that would be compatible with the single pass? And that's what's not clear to me, given the complexity of the use cases that exist in the downstreams today, or even in some of the EDK2 platforms examples. If we don't have a path to convert it to single pass syntax, then I think we're kind of stuck with the multi-pass.
One thing I was that will either add or make less the complexity. Do you know, either of you, when you have a fixed PCD that you assign in the DSC file and you use it later in the DSC as a conditional, does that PCD take into account that it can be scoped to have different values for different, module types, architectures, and so forth? Or does it work only globally? Or is it just undefined and we're just, surviving because it works for what we need?
I can't think of any examples I've seen that it wasn't treating it like a global. I mean, I've seen unnecessary logic that, has, like ifs around it. But in general, I think we use them as feature flags and global settings. And so we don't want to see differences in PEI core versus BIMs versus SMM or whatever. That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, because I mean, at that point, if you had a value that was defined for all, 32-bit modules, and then you had a components.32, and then you had that conditional referenced, but it was a different value than the 64-bit version, let's say, like that will make this parsing a lot harder.
If you look at the packages I've done, you'll see I do that, have architecture specific, but that's because if something isn't support 32 and 64-bit, I'll get a build error when I build the other architecture that's not supported. So sometimes I have to scope them to the i32 or x64 but it's mostly because I can't turn off the error I mean, it's generating a warning or error that's noise. Because the PCD is not used in x64 or whatever. So that's something that should be a small tool fix.
Okay.
In those instances that I'm aware of that I do that.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
will. It's been
and
kind of
this-
on my list to try to see how much work that will be to add.
Right, and it may be valuable, Sean, for some of the use cases that you're concerned about. Build a tiny DSC and check the behavior of the build tool for a tiny one that has that pattern, and make sure that we're matching the behavior of the build tool and see if that matches the spec or not. I think this is some of the things that we may need. It's with Bob and Christine out this week. We may need them back to help with those synthetic cases and verification of behavior relative to the specs, so that we can get that clarified and then we know what we have to do from a compatibility perspective.
Would it be possible to drop that feature from the usage of EDK2 platforms?
Well, it's not just EDK2 platforms, it's EDK2 platforms and all downstream, right? Because it's one of those things that if we want to have a behavior of the DSC parser in our PyTools, Stewart tools, we want to encourage use of those tools in all downstream consumers, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I don't know how much I think people are using that feature. Again, besides Intel derived platforms.
And you're talking specifically about use of PCDs in the if statements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'll take a look. I think that's going to be the first problem you hit if we try to enable a platform, one of the Intel platforms. But I think we can make progress on the feature platform still.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Any other topics from anyone today? Mike, do you have any update on code reviews through GitHub?
I don't. My bandwidth for that is not available right now. I'm working on getting back to it. It's going to take a little bit. I know one of the challenges is that we have to keep the maintainers.txt and our GitHub collaborators in sync, which is a bit of a challenge. I did not quite get them in sync when I was actively working on it because there were people listed in maintainers.txt that were not responding to requests to join teams in TianoCore. So that whole system can't work until we have the set of collaborators, members of our teams. All maintainers and reviewers need to be members of those teams. So we have to either figure out how to get a hold of them or drop them as maintainers and reviewers in order to have that system work. That's one element of it, but that's we need our active set of maintainers and reviewers to actually be responsive to our requests to join teams and be part of the community when we make that kind of transition. If you have people that aren't paying attention, it's going to be really hard to get through that.
Okay. I mean, I would suggest we just drop them, and when they want to become a maintainer again, they understand the new role. But
Yep.
yeah. All right, if there's nothing else, we can call it for today.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Yep,
Thanks, Sean.
thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.